must constantly look at things in a different way.
The Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast was created by two physical therapists out of the desire to learn more about the different educational roles in physical therapy and healthcare, and how healthcare education works by talking with educational leaders and people with different perspectives within physical therapy and across interdisciplinary lines on how education can be improved to disrupt the status quo of healthcare education. This is our journey, and thanks for listening. Are you a third-year physical therapy student that excels on tests when you have study guides, checklists, and deadlines? With all of the information available about how to prepare for the NPTE, it's easy to get disorganized and not feel prepared going into the big day. NPTE Prep Success is an online course that provides PT students easy-to-use study guides and step-by-step guidance through the NPTE preparation. To learn more, visit kylericeprep.com. Thank you again all for your continued support, and now for the show. Hey everybody, and thanks for listening to another episode of the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. This is Brandon speaking. And before we get to today's episode, I wanted to take a moment to share the behind the scenes regarding our coverage of the PT Residency Fellowship issue. At the HET Podcast, we are committed to providing you with diverse perspectives on topics and issues that you care about. We want to inform you about the logistics we encountered when we recorded these series of interviews. You may have noticed that we have had a lack of episodes discussing ABPTRFE's perspective on the change in regulations in fellowships and residencies. Most of our interviews have covered the program's perspective on this issue. I'm going to tell you why. First, we highly recommend that you read all of the available information on both perspectives and consider this issue from all angles. Now, we have provided some resources in our show notes for consideration, so please check those out as well. As for logistics, APTA policy requires all media, including our podcast, to coordinate interviews with board members or representatives of ABPTRFE through the APTA public relations team. Now, over the last few months, we have been collaborating with APTA to feature an ABPTRFE board of director on this very important topic for a podcast episode. We have a date to touch base for scheduling an interview with them in April. Hopefully, we will be able to share their viewpoint through our podcast around that date. I hope this sheds some light on our perspective and content. Now, for today's episode, Stephanie and I chatted again with Dr. Cameron MacDonald regarding updates and new developments on the physical therapy residency and fellowship issue. Now, for this, Cameron provides his insight from his perspective, being a program director, along with being involved in different component leadership roles. Now, Cameron's responses are, of course, his personal views, and were framed to best constructively contribute to the upcoming focus group discussion regarding this topic. Now, without further ado, here's our episode with Cameron. Hey, everybody, and thanks for listening to another episode of the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Pollen, and of course, as always, I'm joined by my fellow co-host, Dr. Stephanie Wyrock. And today, we have a special guest that we've actually had on in the past to kind of give an update on where we stand in regards to the physical therapy, residency, and fellowship issue. Now, if you hadn't heard Cameron's initial episode with Joe Donnelly on our podcast, I highly recommend that you take a listen to that to kind of gain an understanding and perspective of this issue, because this episode is going to be touching base more on the updates regarding this topic. So for those of you who aren't aware, Cameron MacDonald is an assistant professor of physical therapy at Regis University, along with being the current coordinator of the postgraduate fellowship in orthopedic manual physical therapy at Regis, along with being the president of the Colorado chapter of the Colorado Physical Therapy Association. Well, Cameron, I appreciate you coming on again, and I know you've been very instrumental in this issue, and you and many others have done a lot, and I appreciate all that you guys have done. Was there anything I left out of your bio that you think that listeners should know, and kind of what have you been up to lately since we last chatted?
Well, I think the one thing that's germane to the topic at hand is that for approximately the last 5 years, I've been the president and the program director of Special Interest Group of AONT, and helped to first establish the program directors directly to give a voice to the programs in as substantive and purposeful approach as we can with regards to accreditation, certification type issues, and to try and keep us moving ahead in as uniform, not as unified as we can be, but purposefully unified, not just together for the sake of that, but to allow as many independent voices to be heard, but to not have 32 voices. And so it's been an interesting 5 years. I think it's 5 years. But that probably it sort of explains more why I've been heavily involved in this particular discussion. The other aspect is when I came into the role with the program directors, I was also the chief delegate of the Colorado chapter to the APTA House of Delegates. And so bringing motions to the House with regards to looking at the role of ABPTRFE and the accreditation aspects for programs was central to this. To get as much information as we could forward purposefully again, not knowing exactly where we'd end up. So we are where we are right now, and so I'll look forward to your questions to help frame potentially where we're going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, let's back up a little bit, Cameron, because I know we're recording this in April, but at around the time that we had released the last episode with you and Joe was in the January timeframe. And of course, with that, the episode was released prior to Combined Sections Meeting, or CSM. So let's dive into that first. How did discussions go on the residency and fellowship issue go at CSM 2019?
Really, the primary intent, just to speak from my perspective, somewhat individually as a program director, but also my role as the president and the program director of SIG, CSM was very purposeful. We are now at a point where all key players are highly engaged in the topics at hand. We have a very broad profession that has tremendous demands on it. Our leadership has significant issues across a very broad spectrum they have to deal with. And so though for us at the residency and fellowship programs, we could put this up on our pedestal and say this is the primary biggest issue that we have, it's maybe one of 20 issues in front of the profession that our national board has to deal with at the APTA level. So CSM was about the opportunity to have face-to-face meaningful dialogue with interested and very receptive board members who wanted to find out the perspectives we held to become as informed as they could, at the same time as APTA staff and the new chair of ABPTRFE, Dr. Wilcox and others were looking to start seeking another mechanism to get input into the issues that were being brought forth. So the time was made available by key people to have those discussions on the APTA board, and that is very much appreciated. And it sort of gave some validation for us who felt that we appreciate the intent of leadership is in the best purposes with regards to our profession, our educational standards, and how we sit in the broader scheme of healthcare. But sometimes you don't get the outcome that you intend. You won't know that until you start getting granular and start getting down to the level of the programs, the residents in training, the fellows in training, and the hurdles that might come up with the introduction of new policies, new procedures. So CSM allowed for dialogue that was now occurring after the voices had been heard. Yes, the Academy, the Academy of Orthopedic PT have their own discussions ongoing. AOMT has their own discussions ongoing. But speaking from a program perspective, we've been heard, and we now have the opportunity to engage ideally in Alexandria in some more purposeful dialogue. It's just a step at a time, because I don't feel like anyone has all the answers, but we're starting to see the problems. And meaningful dialogue allows for us to identify solutions that maybe have not even been put forward yet. That can only really occur through engaged conversation that allows stakeholders to present ideas, present potential solutions, and for us to listen. And that's been one of the big concerns the last 5 years. Please listen to those who are the experts in the delivery of residency and fellowship education, those who've done it in hybrid models, those who've done it for over a decade, because we don't like to go around saying we're experts in this, but by default, we are those with the most experience within the actual doing. And so a healthy accreditation process is informed by the institutions they work with, by those who deliver the educational product, and it's a dynamic conversation that allows the endpoint to be more purposeful than simply trying to predict it on the front end.
Yeah, I think that, having all those stakeholders together conversing is something that was much needed. And I know in my conversations with people at CSM, that was something that had come up quite a bit. I know that ABPTRFE temporarily suspended the site visit requirement until the focus group met. Have there been any other developments on this topic since we last chatted?
I'd say the primary development is that there will be what looks like a focus to that particular topic, 13.4 in the new policies and procedures and the quality standards. And that is the starting point, ideally, for engaged conversation that's solution-based. It was very strongly put forth by multiple programs that if the site visit policy was not redacted, you could say, or reversed, that there would be independent actions taken by programs to no longer seek accreditation. What has occurred is that the message was heard, but it would be very difficult to convene an open table on every topic that people have a vested issue or concern with. So the start point, and a controlled starting point, with a proposed mediator to be present, is on the Rule 13.4 and that site visit rule that has been at this time suspended. And an updated standards were put out, I believe, in February, that note that rule, which was seen primarily as for many programs, a game breaker because of logistic and financial realities associated with it, that programs could not go forward in the models that they were. So and then what has further happened to that is under the guidance of Bill Bossonol and with APTA staff and with ABPTRFE have reached out seeking specific input on concerns and possible solutions regarding to this site visit policy in a survey base to those who. So that we appreciate that. I appreciate it. I can't speak for others, but I sense there's an appreciation of at least that reach out for information. I look at this as the start of legislative sausage making, you could say. I spend a lot of time in getting state legislation, and we have a final passage of a bill going to the governor in Colorado today. And it tends to be the case, if we're all a little bit unhappy at the end, maybe we'll have reached a workable solution. So I'm hopeful for that, but I'm not going to predict the outcome.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And Cameron, correct me if I'm wrong, but I had heard from CSM that there were some programs, particularly one in particular, that was potentially having to close its doors in the near future. Is that correct?
Yeah, Damon College unfortunately had to close down. And this was a process over a few years, and it's difficult because with the changes in some of the other policies, which with regards to admissions or other standards, there's been a shift in the market with regards to applicants to programs. And so many programs are feeling that pinch right now. And Damon was one, by the reporting given to us in the meetings, that was unable to be sustained within the setting that was in and had to voluntarily teach out. They completed a teach out, as I understand it, for all the fellows in training. So they held to that, which is terrific, but they're unable to go forward any further as a viable program. And that's very sad because as we understand it, some of the mission of ABPTRFE is to the growth and the future development and increasing residency and fellowship education. We understand there'll be some natural attrition that's going to occur regardless, so it's not causative, but there's maybe a correlation in there. And so we wanted that's part of the ongoing dialogue. Have we got a little bit out too far in front of ourselves with regards to trying to develop enough rigor and structure to the process to meet the requirements of external groups, but unfortunately suffering some internal harms? So that's a concern.
Right. And Cameron, you kind of summarized already a little bit about the focus group and what this one's going to involve. And of course, there's going to be key stakeholders there from APTA, ABPTRFE, and program directors. But I'm curious, are the program directors going to be present? Are they mostly going to be comprised of OMPT programs, or are there going to be other fellowship programs or residency programs representatives that will be there as well?
I don't know specifically, Brandon, Stephanie. I don't really know. If I did the math, based upon how many program directors I'm aware of attending from the OMPT, it does not fill the table that'll be present. So I'm presuming yes. It would seem prudent that there would be. I know, like the residency and fellowship SIG that ABPTRFE formed for input does include a broad spectrum of programs present at the table for those discussions. At times it's a little hard to track how many different special interest groups and committees there are. But I would expect to see representatives from outside of OMPT at that table, because we are a large part of fellowships, over 50% of fellowships, maybe 60%, but we only represent perhaps 33 roughly out of maybe nearly 300 combined residencies and fellowships, so just over 10% there. So yes, that would be my understanding, but I have not seen a specific list. I just appreciate the invitation that I do have.
Well, Cameron, I just wanted to kind of add one thing, because you had mentioned, of course, that kind of the earliest and kind of the first starting point in this discussion is, of course, the site visits. And of course, knowing that that's going to be taking place on the 29th of April, if I'm not mistaken, and you can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that. But is it known now when there are going to be further discussions on some of the other issues that have been kind of brought up already? Because I know you said those first issues were kind of the biggest priority right now.
It is not known. Ideally, this discussion will enable further talks, that it will become evident that those present, and even those not, have a vested interest, not purely at their own programmatic level, but at the at the broader post-professional graduate education for physical therapists, that we're looking to try and model a way forward that is very purposeful. Now, we tried to message that when the external audit process was ongoing for ABPTRFE. Maybe we weren't fully heard, or maybe our messaging wasn't what was needed. But I feel like if we can establish an understanding that our intent is not defensive, our intent is purposeful towards the viability of our programs, all programs that meet standards already set, that'll allow for the next series of questions to be asked. That it won't be combative, and it will be a way to bring to that table questions about admissions, questions about two-tiered type programmatic structures. And so what this process does, no matter how awkward it might be or difficult, it does create rapid learning. It's like there's terminology that says if you have a crisis type situation, it is a catalyst for great study and great understanding. So we're becoming more informed of standards for accreditation of accreditation bodies. We want to identify the track we're on as a profession with regards to seeing what other medical healthcare professions have done for over the nearly 100 years with regards to postgraduate residency and fellowship training. So the more informed we all are, I feel the less there would be a pull towards an individual viewpoint or an individual program. And so it's sort of an inverse silver lining to this, though there's probably ways to get here simpler, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and to kind of dive into a little bit of that, Cameron, apart from what you had just mentioned there, what are some of the things that you and other program directors have kind of learned regarding the accreditation process and kind of regarding ABPTRFE's point of view when it comes to how they're looking at it? What have you learned from them about this process since we've last chatted?
There's a certain amount of interpretation built into the process for all, that there is variance between different professions with regards to how their own accrediting bodies structure their guidelines, their policies and procedures that reflect the profession of interest. It's somewhat of us affirm that the marketplace for us is our own profession, that the institutional standards per se really should only be around physical therapist education, with informed standings from other professions, but we have a unique profession and unique scope. So we should have some aspects of our accreditation and structure that's unique to physical therapist education and practice. And so we've seen that in other areas for dentistry, for optometry, for osteopathic, for pharmacy, that there is some built-in variance between these different accredited residency groups and fellowship groups for these other professions that still meet the national type standards put forward by groups such as CHIA, US Department of Education, as we understand it. Now, it's not an in-depth, deep study that we've done. It's more trying to just become informed about why perhaps we are where we are with regards to ABPTRFE seeking accreditation for themselves, which has downstreaming benefits for our profession, but also trying to understand that enough to see if we can be a little bit more flexible in how the structure is set up, so that the unknowns, when they become known, aren't very large hurdles. They're more workarounds. And I can give an example to that, in that until we got invested in the new substantive change process with regards to sites, like we saw on the very front end, the significant financial logistical challenges of now visiting a lot of sites. But it was hard to wrap your head around the new two-step process of advanced approval now versus retroactive for sites. And so putting that into practice and trying to work through that, you start to see that, okay, this is purposeful, but at the same time, here's an unexpected hurdle. Here's a challenge for a program that's seeking initial accreditation or initial candidacy. So to not vest that as a complaint, but say, okay, here's what we've identified that's unique to maybe the hybrid models or unique to this type of program. Are we too rigid in how we've set up our structure so that we're trapped? We don't want that. It's so trying to have our accreditation standards be defensible, be purposeful, but flexible enough to allow for the unknowns within education that are happening as our programs develop, as we try and increase the footprint of residency and fellowship education, which we feel like would meet where APTA wants to be and where ABPTRFE wants to be. So that's a goal. It's a goal. It should be a shared goal. That's my perspective. That the process, the accreditation standards that we've carved out and finalized. When I say we, it's like it's not us as the programs to make that decision, but our elected individuals, our appointed individuals. It has enough rigor to be defensible, but it's flexible enough to not create unnecessary circumstances that are harmful. And so that's been a primary goal and a primary concern. Let's not be so prescriptive and so rigid that we actually leave out more opportunities for future students in residency and fellowship education versus creating more opportunities.
I think that you make a good point about creating opportunities, Cameron. How has the AMP Feasibility Task Force looking into the fellowship standards brought any new insight into where they stand regarding the alternative accreditation?
Well, that one I've not got too much information on, unfortunately, Stephanie. I'm not on that task force. So because I don't sit on any particular boards right now, I can have this conversation. I'm just aware that that's ongoing, that it's a very thoughtful process. It's looking at options that are present, but also to be informed of how one would go about the accreditation process from the next step up, because information is valuable. And we have very busy lives. We treat patients, we educate students, and so our focus is not on the topic of accreditation typically. And so this is drawing us into that realm. So and that's just my understanding, that the task force information gathering to be informed so as to be able to have meaningful dialogue and have it not just be maybe an emotive response to a sudden demand that makes programs somewhat unfeasible.
Yeah, and Cameron, I want to kind of go back a little bit in regarding to the focus group here. So I know this is kind of a loaded question and it's kind of a hypothetical question here, but how do you hypothesize that focus group will carry out? Like, what do you see the outcome of that focus group actually being?
I'd say it would be a loaded question if I was one who approached a meeting such as that with an intent that this is what must happen, but I don't. And I can speak to my time in legislative track records that I make the lobbyists look at me slightly strange when I tell them we have to have a purposeful intent, provide honest information going in, and be humble enough to accept the process as it develops and the end product that is given. And I've done that for the Colorado legislature the last 4 or 5 years. And though we've been very successful, actually, I did not demand that we had a certain outcome, because that would be to abrogate the benefits of discussion and discernment. I would just look that this discussion allows us to discern better ways forward than those we currently have in front of us, which do not match the needs of hybrid type programs and do not seem to match to the vision of ABPTRFE or APTA with regards to looking towards growth and purposeful development of residency and fellowship education to serve societal needs and bring quality physical therapist education. So that's a long-winded answer. I did not want it to sound political, but it's sort of how I approach large issues. I want my intent to be purposeful and honest and to not have a required outcome.
Yeah, I think that This has been a very important topic that has meant a lot to people in our profession, and they've had a lot of questions. And I think you've done a really good job, Cameron, on answering a lot of these questions. And I know on the previous podcast that you were on before, we had asked you this question, and, potentially minds can change. So we're going to ask you again. If you could change anything in healthcare education, whether it be in DPT or otherwise, what would you change and how would you change it?
Well, it would require me to remember my previous answer if I was to seek to reflect on that. And so right now, as I think about the question, I think I may have touched on this in my prior answer, but I would want us not to lose the imagination and ingenuity of the clinician mindset in how we structure education. My time with now 150 graduates of the Regis Fellowship has taught me that with too much structure and too much rigidity, you limit the potential outcome that is present within each individual in that realm. The initial IFOMP guiding document on educational standards had the word etc. in it. They did not know what the best model of post-professional education would be, and they had the humility to state that within their guiding documents. Here's some elements we want you to include, but you as the educators will discover what the next best fit is for a fellow in training. A fit, poor pun. So I would like us to not be so rigid that we cannot unearth the next best approach, that we put ourselves in a scenario where we can't embrace a technological advancement or an academic structure or clinical education structure that's different than what we have now. And so that's what I would seek, that we always consider that what works for today may not work for tomorrow. So we need to be flexible enough in the language and the semantics we choose that we respect our own ignorance of what's to come next.
I think that's a great answer, Cameron. I mean, we have to be futuristic and visionary in the way that we think, especially as healthcare changes so quickly. It's not going to be the same even tomorrow. This has been a great conversation. People are probably going to have questions for you. Where can they find you on social media or through email?
Well, I can be found. I'll be honest, with social media, I've sort of disappeared for a while. Because of the journey through the Colorado legislature and having finally passed the bills today, I might reappear. But I think on Twitter I live as PhysioCam, but I can be found at Regis through the Regis faculty. I just pop up. People can contact me there through the email. But I appreciate the time to answer. I would note that I've not been too specific in some of the answers today because I want to be respectful to this process that we're in. And that we've certainly voiced a lot of concerns over the last few years, but I'd like to see that bigger picture. And so if people have suggestions and thoughts, they know how to find me. But I appreciate the time given, and I appreciate what you're both doing in your education healthcare podcast to enable us to have meaningful conversations, because they do matter.
They do. And, we appreciate that. And we thank you for, again, what you and others have done regarding this issue and many other things too, and for your time, because it is making a difference. It is facilitating these conversations. And, again, Cameron, thanks so much for all that you do for not even just this issue, but for Residency Fellowship and also for, just physical therapy in general. It's been a pleasure having you on, and thank you again.
Well, my very best to you both. And I look forward to you finding interesting and enlightening characters in the future to talk with.
Access to healthcare is one of the largest issues facing both providers and patients, as millions of people worldwide lack timely and affordable access to healthcare. Anywhere Healthcare, a telehealth platform, is a simple, low-cost option for providers and patients that eliminates the barriers to access to all kinds of healthcare. To find out more, check out anywhere.healthcare, which is available in our show notes. And if you use the code HET in all caps when you email to sign up, you'll save 25% off the total cost. Thank you for attending class today, and we hope that you learned something and gained value from the content.
If you'd like to schedule office hours with us, feel free to add us on Twitter at HET Podcast, on Instagram, HET Podcast, on Facebook, the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast, and the homepage, healthcareeducationtransformationpodcast.com.
And for those of you following along in the syllabus, Extra credit can be obtained by liking us, sharing us, and leaving a review.
Let's continue our journey up Mount Educational Success as lifelong learners.